Afternoon. It is June the 1st, 2023. I'm Matthew Holt, THCB founder, publisher, guy who does all the work. And it's THCB Gang and a great lineup. We've had a couple of people cry off, and it's now been renamed the Old White Gang, or possibly Old White Guy Gang, or possibly the Old Wisdom Gang, depending who you believe. But anyway, today I have Ian Morrison, a health futurist from Menlo Park, Vince Kuraitis, platform analyst and consultant, and Jeff Goldsmith. So, gents, great to see you all. And it's the first time that we've been back post the little hiatus we had. And during that time, and I want to give you guys a chance. I know it happened last week. I want to give you guys a chance just to reflect. During that time, we lost, sadly, one of our regulars, Casey Quinlan, who, as I think we all know, had cancer. And recurred, was on the gang a number of times this year, and then obviously made it, started going downhill, went to hospice and died a few weeks back. A lot of stuff on THCB, on Twitter, elsewhere, all about her, and there was a lot of reminiscing, a lot of sort of fond memories of her. So I want to give anybody a chance. They want to say a word or two if you've interacted with Casey on THCB Gang or elsewhere about that, if you want to, before we dive into the more sort of quantity and stuff.
I'd just say a sad loss. I mean, I thought Kim and you wrote very nice pieces in the blog that reflected a lot of what many of us felt about her. She was kick-ass funny and smart and dedicated. So it's a real loss.
Just a
I
real
will never
feisty piece of work, really, really strong values, and advocate for all of us. Yeah, she'll really be missed.
I'll never forget the when she showed us the tattoo on her chest of the code that gave the doctors access to her patient information. Great sense of humor, and she'll be missed.
Absolutely, and in no way shy at all, which is amazing.
Really,
it's amazing. I remember having dinner with her and going on. It's not often I struggle to get a word in edgeways, but no, it was and she and I think she also what I think of the reminiscences and of the tributes paid. One of the things that I think is amazing how much a few individuals, and you can think of others, as e-patient Dave and Regina Holiday and others, basically throwing themselves into it front and center, have moved along at least the conversation, and hopefully eventually the actual policy and the practicality of things like getting access to medical records and all this, and having more active participation in healthcare between doctors and between patients and clinicians and systems. And I think it's great. And obviously people, as we all know, present company included, put in that situation in the way you don't necessarily want to be. Ian was mentioning earlier that he's now an RVU machine for the American healthcare system.
It's my only role in life. Yeah.
All right. Well, moving on from that point in tributes to Casey, stuff's happening in healthcare again, and the US government is apparently looks like it's not going to default. So, Ian, what have you been up to? What have you been looking at?
Well, I hope we could get everyone's take on that debt ceiling thing. I just feel relieved, but I was up in the Pacific Northwest tour for 10 days, mostly family in Seattle and Vancouver, but I was speaking to the Washington State Medical Association, but also looking at news stories when I was up in Canada, and it sort of coincided with the Sarah Cliff's piece in the New York Times today about Lina. It's under the theme of hospitals going from heroes to zeros, and sort of whistleblowing internally from a lot of these hospital systems. There was a similar story to the New York Times one this morning about Lina in the BC, British Columbia press about Surrey Memorial, where emergency room docs were blowing the whistle on quality because of waiting times and inadequate funding and all the rest of it. So you think we've got problems, everybody's got the same kind of catastrophic failure of access. But anyway, maybe we can talk a bit about that. But I'd love to hear everyone's take on the debt ceiling as part of our agenda.
Absolutely. Vince?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying I was wrong. One of my
That's not allowed in this. You can't, not allowed here. You have
What
It
to-
had
about
to happen
what?
sometime. Okay, so one of my perceptions about a relative shuffling of strength and strategic positioning because of COVID has been that health plans have been beneficiaries of COVID. They've certainly benefited financially from patients not showing up, and in turn have had a ton of money to invest in new initiatives that, in my mind, observation, have tried to move them up the food chain, to try to disintermediate the relationship with providers. Things like virtual care, telehealth, virtual first health plans, their initiatives. Humana has a program, a hospital at home program that doesn't even have a hospital involved. And so what makes me really rethink that is a survey that was published yesterday by J.D. Power. And I'll read you a couple of the statistics. Their survey of customer satisfaction of health plan members, and it's pretty extensive. They looked at 147 health plans in 22 different regions. So overall satisfaction is down 13 points on a 1,000 point scale. So that's 1.3%. Doesn't sound like that much, but I would have expected it to have been way up, not just down. And if you look at some of the numbers underneath that, that's 33%, 33-point decline in satisfaction with customer service, coverage and benefits down 20, provider choice down 16, net promoter score for new members is 6. And significantly, I think sicker patients are less likely to receive proactive care coordination. Just 36% saying that their health plan has helped them coordinate care. And health plan member usage of digital health tools remains low. So at the very least, it's a failure of execution. And I'd be interested in the statistics. Surprised me. I would have expected health plans to have used COVID as an opportunity to develop a much tighter relationship with patients, but this J.D. Power survey says no.
Interesting.
Interesting stuff. Jeff.
Well, I mean, I've certainly been brooding about the end of Geisinger as a freestanding institution. There's been a lot of speculation in the press about the new relationship to Kaiser, and the creation of an organization called RiseAnt. I don't know where the name came from. Rise.
Sounds to me like it's supposed to be Risant, rhyming with pissant, but maybe not.
RiseAnt. I don't know how to pronounce it, but
No,
I mean, I have
a
a 30+ year long relationship with Geisinger. I went over there under Henry Hood. I went over there under Glenn Steele, one of the finest multi-specialty physician groups in the country, a spectacular tertiary hospital, a great health plan, a lot of innovation in value-based care. They did everything we asked them to do, and it's $7 billion of scale. They still weren't able to remain independent. So that's authentically scary to me, whether that means, they executed the value-based payment / integrated delivery system playbook, but just got hammered by COVID. Maybe there were management issues. My spies tell me that Atlanticare pulling out of the Geisinger system in 2020 badly damaged them financially, and they may never have recovered from that. But $842 million loss in 2022, $20 million a month on operations. It's really scary to me, because the assumption that you do all this stuff and you're meeting a community need and you have a population-based approach to healthcare, it wasn't enough. And it's not obvious what Kaiser is going to add to it other than the money. They get $1 billion or a couple $1 billion or whatever it is, but Kaiser doesn't know anything about running a multi-payer, multi-market care delivery system like Geisinger. and they know nothing about Pennsylvania, zero. So I'm baffled and concerned all the way around by the demise of Geisinger.
Yeah, Jeff, that's really interesting. I don't know them as well as you do, but I know the Kaiser guys pretty well. I don't know if you all saw Robbie Pearl sent a thing out about his Forbes article.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was talking to my my deep throat inside sources who are all retired from Kaiser now, but I still keep tabs. And we were tweeting about it when the deal first went down. I mean, I think the essence of the strategy was in Robbie's piece about Kaiser's always been trying to prove a point. You know, I mean, I fought with Dave Lawrence and Halverson and all of them over the years about what the hell are you doing in Georgia and Colorado? You know, I mean, as to Jeff's point, I mean, they've failed pretty much when they haven't had all the assets nailed down. And you know, Geisinger, I know a lot of the systems around it I've worked with, and you know, I don't see where the growth opportunity is, to be perfectly honest. You know, they're surrounded by people who have growth aspirations of their own. But I do think a lot of this is about trying to prove a point that they're more than just a regional player. And I think there's another strategy they could have followed, which is just be even more dominant in the places you are, which might have been smarter. Because I agree completely with Jeff's analysis that in terms of being able to run a multi-payer, multi-channel integrated regional health system, it doesn't seem to me they bring that much to the party. And the other thing that was just one final point quickly, Jeff, is what did Permanente get out of it? That was also in Robbie's thing, because
exactly
those of us who know Kaiser well, as we all do, you know, that matters. And basically Permanente, Northern California rescued Mid-Atlantic and Southern California rescued Georgia at various times. It's not clear to me what the winning, whether they were involved. That was a piece of intelligence leaked in Robbie's piece. They weren't even in the middle of the discussion, so kind of mystifying. And we'll see.
My take is probably a little more optimistic than you guys, but I will also admit I don't have the personal relationships you may have had with some of you know, the main players. But I think what to me it provides is a missing gap of, you know, a major not-for-profit, you know, system that's focused on value, that's, I mean, truly committed. I mean, Kaiser and Geisinger have been leaders in that area. And, you know, I think it's too early to call it. I think what will be really interesting to see is who else joins this group over the next 12, 24, 36 months. And, you know, there's probably a number, the metaphor of, you know, value-based care with one foot on the dock and one foot on the canoe. You know, I think we're hitting, you know, that tipping point, and that could move systems, the availability of a system like Risant or Risant, I don't know how you pronounce it, to me seems like it would be a safety net for systems that recognize they need to move more in the value-based care, and that a lot of the value that I see of this is in the exchange of knowledge among these organizations, you know, somewhat independent of the finances. And my general understanding is that Risant is more of a holding company. It's not really an operating company. So I think I'm encouraged, and I'd like to see where it goes.
Well, I mean, just to back up a little bit, on Ian's point, the closest affinity between these two organizations were the groups.
right.
The Geisinger Clinic was conceivably a Permanente medical group of Pennsylvania, but that's not the way the deal was structured. It was an outgrowth of the hospital division of Kaiser, which is an ancillary service to the group and the health plan. It isn't an entity unto itself. And it is, let's be blunt here, not known for operational excellence. It's, you know, it's it's not a leading edge hospital system. So that by itself is sort of a concern. And then I wrote a piece for Health Affairs 7 years ago about Glenn Steele's turnaround of Geisinger. And Glenn did a spectacular job during his 12 years there and left the place in a really good spot. And one of the main pieces of Glenn's turnaround was converting the health plan from an HMO with extremely limited range and limited market prospects to a PPO, and severing the capitated contract with the group to try and get a better allocation of risk between the three pieces of the system and to get it moving again. And he succeeded in doing it. He moved away from a Kaiser model to turn.
So can I ask you a
around.
question, Jeff?
Sure.
So there's three pieces to Kaiser. There's the hospital, the health plan, and the medical group. So
Right.
how would you have preferred this combination to have come about, or even at the other extreme, would you just have not have preferred it to come about?
Well, no. I mean, I think the Kaiser brand is valuable.
It's very valuable.
And the idea that it's not going to be a Kaiser health plan. It's going to be a Geisinger health plan with Kaiser technical assistance. It isn't going to be a Permanente medical group. It's going to be the Geisinger clinic with technical assistance. What's the technical assistance that's going to turn this system around? You know,
Well, I'm still left with
Ian
my
is-
question of what would you have preferred to have seen?
Ian is absolutely dead right. That, you know, this, there aren't a lot of growth prospects here. Central Pennsylvania, that I-81 corridor and east and west of it, which Geisinger sort of owns, is desperately depressed. Scranton, Pennsylvania, the home of our president, you know, there's not a lot of upside here. So, you know, there are health systems in the region that are potential, you know, larger actors that could have come into Geisinger. Guthrie Clinic in Sayre would be one of them. Lehigh Valley would be another one. Both of those guys are in turnaround. But, you know, putting systems together that build on the geographic footprint of Geisinger would have been a creative solution. One, of course, that would have required more capital. Maybe that's what we're going to do with Kaiser's $1 billion. But if Rysant's goal is to accumulate other failing integrated delivery networks, you know, they'll go into Minneapolis and pick up Health Partners. They'll go into New Orleans and pick up Oxner that is struggling. And you'll have $30 billion worth of integrated delivery systems burning up their $5 billion in largesse. So I think there is a strategy that broadens the footprint inside Pennsylvania and that creates true integration between all these different medical communities based on some type of value-based model. So there is a pathway out of this, but I don't think it's the one that they're going to choose.
You use the word failing other failing delivery systems.
Yep.
I'd prefer to use the word other transitioning
What?
delivery systems.
Oh, that's like Casey transitioning. A lot of these folks are really, really sick. And it's not clear how they get turned around. The public sentiment towards hospital systems is extremely negative. Something that's been pointed out on this podcast before. There's a lot of questions about their nonprofit status. There's a lot of questions about, frankly, to be blunt, how well managed they are.
Good questions.
So transitioning to what, Vince?
To the population-based, value-based model that,
Come on.
that Kaiser
Geisinger was a
embraced.
pioneer of value-based payment. They know
Sorry.
more about value-based payment than Kaiser does.
Who
And
does?
they still got their asses kicked.
So let me ask the sort of the generic question which Robbie Pearl asked. Can you do, and I've asked this in different ways, right, about Medicare Advantage particularly. Can you do population health the way that we were, you know, taught about it in Alan Hoban's class? Well, I was taught about now. Hoban's class. You know, can you do that without, as Robbie Pearl says, giving the money to the medical groups and having the medical group manage it? Can you do it by holding the money in the health plan and trying to do what Geisinger did. Is that what blew up Geisinger? Does that work? Because it doesn't seem like, the alternative is to try to build a bunch of medical groups and figure out how to make them manage it. And maybe it's a stretch to say that's where Optum's going. Maybe that's where CVS and Walgreens, are going with their acquisitions. So I'm just, the question would be is does either of these strategies possibly work for the transition, or are we just going to be spending the capital these systems have accumulated over time trying to stop them dying and failing? What do you think? Ian and then Jeff and
maybe another sort of perspective on this. Let's try and sort of reconcile the two elements of the discussion here. It is conceivable, and I know that this has been going on inside Kaiser for a decade almost, where they had aspirations to find like-minded platforms, to Vince's point, in other markets. But I go way back to, I was an advisor to Alan Hoops when he was running Pacific here back in the 90s, who had aspirations of, well, I'm just going to take my model from Southern California and go and find medical groups like there are in Southern California all over the country. I called it the where's Bob Margolis problem. Because once you get out of Southern California, there aren't any, right? And finding those other like-minded platforms. And I think, I've always described Kaiser as the Greek Orthodox Church. It's not for everybody. And you're either you're both doctors and patients, you decide after 12 months whether you love it, and you're in it forever. And the good news is California is Greece. And so at one level, this Geisinger was a close proximal to the Greek Orthodox Church, right? With all the caveats that Jeff and Vince have talked about. So it is a proximal, like entity. But where do you go from here? Where are the other ones? Maybe Austria. I don't know. I mean, but I don't see a lot of shiny candles.
I on that point, I have Jeff was saying. I mean, I remember talking to Robbie Pearl in 2010, 11 when he was running the DC, Mid-Atlantic Kaiser group, and he said, and what he was saying very loudly, and everyone, no one would back him up. Although apparently he told me that he and George Halverson went and tried to sell it a few other places, but couldn't get the backing. But then George left, and the new CEO Bernard Tyson didn't want to do it. But he said, he was basically saying, we figured out how to do this. We can go anywhere. We can launch, we can go and hire a medical group out of like-minded young people coming out of residency. I can go stick it anywhere. I can go stick this in New York City. I can go stick it in Chicago. I can go stick this, and I can do what they did in DC, which is not have their own hospital, but take a wing of another hospital and run it from there. And I was saying, well, when's it going to happen? Because if you're that much better, that much cheaper, surely American employers will buy it. And the answer is, didn't happen, right?
Well, Matthew, you couldn't get much closer to Kaiser than Group Health at Puget Sound, could you? How's that going? Not well.
Right.
It was already a Permanente medical group. There was a tremendous alignment of values between Kaiser and Group Health. Group Health is still a sick franchise. So, I mean, I'm not sure what the magic here is. I mean, maybe it's a whole lot more Robbie Pearls.
Can you point to a health system
charismatic leaders that can focus their constituents, their colleagues, on a value-based approach like Vince is talking about? But it seems to me the common denominator of a lot of these places is a leadership crisis.
I mean,
they're not being managed effectively.
I don't disagree with your perceptions of the challenges of hospitals, but can you point to a health system that, there's hundreds of health systems across the country. Can you point to some and articulate what they're doing right?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, we've got a pretty good one here in Virginia, in Centera and in Inova. We've got two good ones here in this state. They are, one of them is led by a health plan executive, another by physicians. They have a very strong medical group. They have a strong health plan. Inova doesn't have a health plan, but it has charismatic physician leadership in Stephen Jones, and a very, very strong, unified clinical culture. It isn't a value-based culture because there isn't a lot of demand for the type of Kaiser-like care in their market. So there's a lot of systems that are performing right now at a very high level. They're just not performing the value-based care playbook that everybody continues banging on about.
Yeah, I'd add to that list people like Ohio Health and
Yep.
others across the country.
There's a good one.
But,
WellSpan that you talked about in to the immediate south of Geisinger, that has a spectacular physician group. Again, no health plan, but really strong clinical leadership. There's no shortage of strong places, Vince. There really isn't. They're just not like Kaiser.
Yeah.
And I think honestly, Kaiser has such power of incumbency in the big markets that they're in. It's been kind of a substitute for leadership. It's not made it easy. What they do is very complex, and they're very large, complicated organizations. And if you believe the star ratings, if you believe consumer ratings, they're doing a pretty darn good job. But the ability to come sailing into central Pennsylvania and magically transform the place with a bunch of buzzwords, lots of luck.
Yeah. Well, the other irony here is that, I know I want to be discreet here, but Governor Leavitt was very active, certainly, and vocal around some of the consolidations that Intermountain undertook, including SCL. And there was the reported efforts trying to get together with Sanford and the Dakotas. There are a bunch of like-minded, value-oriented, to Vince's point, that could be rolled up. And you could argue that that's kind of the PowerPoint behind the Advocate, Atrium, Aurora mergers. Although I've been joking that the basis for that merger was alphabetic, like they rolled up the A's, and then we're going to have a system with all the B's and all the C's and all the D's.
This is like Jester Massa's point about mergers in digital health with companies with similar colored logos.
Yeah,
Jeff, I got a follow up.
That's a great idea.
Follow-up question, and I'm going to admit the cynicism behind my question. So is the playbook for delivery systems to just lie down and continue to hope that value-based care goes away?
No, they've got to listen to their markets, and they've got to listen to their patients and their docs.
Yeah,
and create a coherent way of delivering high-quality care to them. We've assumed that this is all about incentives, haven't we? And that if we just find the perfect operant conditioning schedule, we'll tame that fee-for-service monster and everything will be fine. I think we've got the wrong model for how clinicians work and think, and this is not a country. It's about 10 different countries. And the playbook that works in California or Greece, as Ian puts it, isn't necessarily going to work in Serbia or Turkey. And we've got to acknowledge that, we're going to have to figure out a way to meet people where they are. And it may not be some kind of neat, elegant economic formula that does it.
I'd agree that it's been very hard, very, very hard to move people around. It's been very hard to get anybody with economic power to care. And what I'd say by that is that you can look at, the Dave Chases of the world, the Rosettas going around saying, we can get the Pittsburgh school district and that one hotel chain in Orlando and whatever to go and buy care and save money and all that kind of great stuff. And nobody follows. And if you don't have an economic, on the incentive side, Jeff, you don't have an economic act, a large series of economic actors who really demand something very different. I would actually think Vince is right. You can play the long game of waiting for fee-for-service value-based care to never come to your town. And I think you're right. There've got to be, Jeff, you've been talking about this for a long time. There've got to be alternatives to saying it's all going to be Kaiser in the future. We haven't really figured out what those alternatives are, and there are still lots of things happening, in the system that go back to the Alina article this morning, which are not pretty.
Right.
What is it? Think about this, Vince, for a minute. What is it that the Kaiser, that the VA under Ken Kaiser had that it didn't have before or since? What did Kaiser itself have under George Halverson that it didn't have under Dave Lawrence or under George's successor? What did Geisinger have under Glenn Steele that it didn't have under Dave Feinberg and Jae-Won Wu. Okay. Well, what they had was leadership and the ability to understand what motivated the value structure and the value system that motivated their clinicians to be excellent, to reach out and to think more broadly than just about their own practice or their own department. We have a leadership crisis in this field, not an incentives crisis.
And just a couple of comments. It's funny we were saying that because you wrote a piece, Jeff, a few years ago, which I thought was the point you made earlier about terroir. You know, it's like the wine. We've all been to different markets and they're all different. The story's different. Everyone was the same PowerPoint, but the actual facts on the ground are different. And I do think leadership, particularly, and this is where Robbie's insights are important, it's the physician leaders in particular, not just the CEOs. But the other thing that, you know, we keep coming back to, certainly in my sort of work on the ground, is a lot of this has to do with operational excellence. Some of them are just not run well. Some are run better. And that actually ends up in a tight environment like we're in right now, where employers, they haven't got their act together, Matthew, you're absolutely right, but they're resisting more than they have in a while, certainly, you know, out where you've got people actually laying folk off in some industries. So it's not the bailout of just raising commercial prices isn't there. And I think you're starting to see that in the finances of people as they come back, the differentiation between operational excellence. Jeff and I were talking about the HCA versus some of the multi-state large Catholic systems in a private conversation we were having earlier this week. That's illustrative, I think, of operational excellence differences.
So let's assume you're right, Jeff. You know, leadership's the problem here. You know, what's the action item? I mean, are you going to just fiat in better leadership? Do we have an uprising of boards who now recognize this and they institute better leaders wherever they're going to find them? Even if you're right, I don't see where that gets us.
Well, what's the goal? The goal is to get more mileage out of that incredible amount of money that we're spending on healthcare, on taking better care of patients and not damaging them, on listening to patients, on being out ahead of their problems instead of waiting until they crash. You know, is changing the incentives the way in which you do that? No, it isn't, in my view.
Okay, and we can disagree on that one.
It's motivating clinicians to change their care model and to collaborate in creating structures that enable them to do that. So to me, I mean, we all assume, oh my God, when we get rid of fee-for-service. Fee-for-service is there for a reason. It's there because us patients believe that medical care is actually helpful to us. And we've built this entire apparatus under the assumption that doctors are corrupt, all of them. And that unless we take away the cookie jar, they're not going to do the right thing. We assume they're crooks. That if we don't stand in the way of them lining their pockets, they're simply not, they're simply going to continue wasting dollars. I think that's an absolutely obnoxious thesis.
I've got a much different narrative here.
Pardon me?
I've got a different narrative here. You know,
well, sure.
Fee for system, you know, has huge problems, and I think lots of people recognize that it doesn't incentivize the right types of behaviors, like sharing information and coordinating care for patients. And we need to build a system that incentivizes, or I want to avoid that word since you don't like it. You know, we need to build a system that is coordinated and not just where the individual practitioner does what they think is best. There's no coordination to the healthcare system. And the value-based care system is if you go and look at what type of care is delivered, I mean, the care needs to be proactive. You need to follow the patient outside of the 4 or 5 or 6 times they're in the office. Sometimes we may need to manage them outside of the office, and that's all part of a value-based care system that is not going to come about through a fee-for-service payment.
Well, you know, all I can say is I didn't get capitated care at the University of Chicago when I had cancer, but every single piece of what you talked about happened. I didn't get value-based care when my hips fell apart at Martha Jefferson Hospital, but that's exactly the kind of care I got, where the doctors worked together, where they planned ahead of the intervention, where there were a whole bunch of things they didn't do that would have earned them money because I didn't need them. Do you think that
I presume
I mean, I think
the very best medicine in our medical care system is in well-led, value-motivated, multi-specialty groups? You can pay them however you want. I've worked in Southern California. There were a lot of capitated medical groups that were run by bandits. They were thieves. They were ripping off the plans that they were
I thought you said doctors were
so the idea
motivated
that
by money.
there's some kind of magic
I'm hearing contradictions
to
here.
a payment methodology. Vince, I've been in this field for 48 years. I've actually been out in the field working with clinicians. It ain't about the money, dude.
so. Let me ask you. Let me. The problem when I get listen out there in the world of doctors, I get a lot of we're burnt out, we're being pushed too hard by the corporate organizations we're working for. I'm not hearing that we're being empowered to go and build these great systems you're talking about, Jeff, under any payment system. I just got an email from just got a piece in which I'll be running next week from a doc who built his own EMR and did all this great stuff, and then got integrated into one of the Boston systems and had quit 3 years early because he was burned out, and they were just he was feeling literally wrote an email to the CEO saying, "You don't allow me to deliver care in the way I need to deliver care to my patients." You hear a lot of these kinds of stories. You're hearing a lot of them through as the private equity groups come in and squeeze harder on things like the emergency groups. You're hearing a lot of these, the HCA training emergency residents and giving them a terrible resident experience / training compared to what they could be getting. You're hearing a bunch of these stories which don't seem to be going the right way. So whether it's value-based care, whether it's private equity coming in, whether it's whatever's happening, burnout from doctors, less professionalism or being demands to unionize and that kind of stuff. Seems to me that I understand what you're saying. Let's get some more value out of the vast amount of money we're spending. It would be nice, in my view, for to spend less money, but I don't really see any of the leadership you've been talking about coming. And in fact, Ian, you wrote a book about this 15 years ago, demanding better leadership.
Yeah, but look, I just spent a couple of days with 150 docs up in the wilds of Central Washington state, not DC. And there were
not that wild.
We'll get back to
the DC wildness in a second. Sorry,
there was a common thread of grumpiness, whether they were Kaiser docs, Providence docs, or individual docs. They're all on, whether they like it or not, an RVU treadmill, right? And they're burned out, and the system, many of them feel they're working for the man unless they are fortunate still to be in solo practice, but making way less money than their peers who are subsidized by their health systems massively. So I think there is a crisis there. But I think Jeff's point is basically people are trying to do the right clinical thing. Well, I've been, talking about narrative. Well, I've been working with health systems around, particularly because I'm doing LA Children's tomorrow or Saturday morning, actually. And I've been working with Valley Children's. But it's saying and this is a very specific problem they had in the last go around, where they were turning away patients because they were full of RSV or RVS, I always get it the wrong way around, less ill. I'm walking away from a lot of revenue. And so what I've been trying to get people to think about is, even if you're not capitated, even if you're not incentivized to do some of these upstreaming things that Vince was talking about, do it in the name of throughput and operational excellence. Don't do it in the name of, capitation per se. And that, to me, it's one way to motivate them. It's finding a strategic story that enables you to do your thing and sustains you economically. And it is this combination of throughput, operational excellence, and inevitably going upstream and beyond the walls to solve some of those problems. I'll give you one other example. Jeff, maybe you can weigh in with the company you're involved in. But, I was in New York a 3 weeks ago at the Concord Health Partners deal where we're with the portfolio companies. This is a private equity firm that's running the AHA's innovation fund. And a bunch of the portfolio companies were there, including, Cedar and Loyal and others, Matthew, Anyway, one stellar example was at Houston Methodist, where they're using a ChatGPT enhanced toolkit to abstract from the medical record short summaries and write the kind of my chart responses. So the company that's working with Houston Methodist, one of our companies, did this has been deployed to 15,000 clinicians throughout Houston Methodist. They've done 1 million, kind of instances of use of this. Guess how many were overridden by a human being?
12. Okay.
Six out of 1 million, right?
Yeah.
And they're saving clinicians 30 to 60 minutes per shift in time. And Jeff, you're investing in a company that's doing something similar, I think.
I made my first venture investment in 16 years at the end of 21 in a company that has developed a tool that enables a clinician that's, needs to write a diagnostic note. It completely reads the record. It reads all the PDF/text blobs in the record, abstracts out the clinical information, and structures a clinical note for them, which they can amend, click, and sign in 5 minutes. I mean, what Ian is talking about is real, and it's the same, my random sample of docs, they're spending half their time typing, putting in core measures, providing information so that, their claims can be denied and all the rest of it. I'd want to quit and go do something else if I trained to help people and was spending half my time typing. Yeah. So, we've been fiddling around with a whole bunch of different models of value-based care for 15 years, more than 15 years. And it's increased the documentation burden. It's diverted people from actually taking care of patients. So whatever marginal coordination benefits accrued from this have been more than wiped out by the soul-crushing, burden of all this crap that they have to do that has really nothing to do with taking care of people.
So the AI is going to come fix it? I mean, I think
it'll help.
It certainly will help, right? And
it'll help. I don't know if it's going to fix it or not. I mean, I don't think anything is going to quote fix it. I mean, and it's not just us. I mean, Matthew, you've got a lot of friends in Britain and a lot of knowledge about the National Health Service. The National Health Service is in worse shape than our healthcare system is. I mean, 14,000 people stuck in the hospital with no place to go, 7 million people on waiting lists, universal care with a budget.
25%.
It's essentially northeastern Pennsylvania, right? It's the whole country,
right?
A lot of it, state, and
a lot of it.
I'd agree, and I think there is. Having said that, I mean, if you look at the power of, so I was I made probably a fatal error, and I introduced ChatGPT to my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, the ChatGPT, because she wouldn't she was writing a thing about global warming and I said I was giving her all these explanations, and she kept on shouting at me, and eventually I said, well, let's ask this computer. So then, of course, she spent her time copying and pasting from ChatGPT into her report, and said, you can't do that, plus they'll notice. But what is coming, right, in terms of getting computers to essentially take on agency, go look for data, produce solutions, and then get them signed off by clinicians, highly paid professionals, we can see is coming, and you can imagine that could be a significant change. Now we are at the peak of the hype, right? We're seeing Epic working with Microsoft and ChatGPT. You're seeing General Catalyst and Andreessen put in $50 million into a company that barely exists called Hippocrates AI, run by a guy who just laid off a bunch of his previous employees in his previous Medicare broker run.
Martin Shkreli getting into AI. I mean, God help us.
So but what I'm saying is that that's all coming, and there's clearly healthcare is a place where it really could work. And if you could argue that the care coordination and the patient outreach and the customer service part can be done so much better by bots. And I've been talking to, every company I talk to now has a thing that's going to do something to do with AI and patient communication and bots and the rest of it, and they're getting better and better, as you said. So I think that there's something to be said for all that. But it always comes back to the point where we come back to here, and then we need to shift and talk about we'll have to shift and talk about the debt ceiling and what we think is going to happen policy wise. It always comes back to the fact that you have sick, hard to reach, hard to deal with people who consume most of the resources, and they're the hardest ones to coordinate care for. And
Right.
Even this week there was a thing about Papa, which was kind of like the great shining hope of let's go visit people on behalf of Medicare Advantage plans in their houses. And Bloomberg found a whole bunch of issues where either the senior being visited or the person doing the visiting wasn't properly vetted, and there was all kinds of unpleasant problems, including assault and that kind of stuff. And the kind of stuff you get in home care and you get in nursing homes anyway, because they're underfunded and these people are very hard to manage, hard to deal with. So I don't know if we have any kind of a solution for that, but I do agree that the technology will definitely help, but it's not going to solve the world. And we were told EMRs going to help a lot, right? And they've helped, but they haven't changed the world anyway.
Right. Well, look,
Yeah.
and it goes, and let's not discuss. Vince's core point was incentives matter. I think, and I don't disagree with that. And both Jeff and I have been preaching this stuff for a long time too. But they're necessary, but not sufficient. And I guess what we're pointing to is it's some combination of better management, better leadership, better use of technology, and better alignment with the incentives that exist. And that's why I've been spending time on this issue of throughput rather than capitation, because we all wanted it to be capitated, but as Jeff has pointed out to us eloquently and is right, it's the square root of zero, in terms of penetration in the system.
And I would say that some of the technology, digital health things have flipped over. Like so, hospital at home, which was initially going to be, we're going to work on behalf of capitated medical groups to stop people being, to starve the hospital. It's now become we're going to help the hospitals improve their throughput, under COVID and other stuff, and make it, get the lower acuity people out so we can get the higher acuity people in.
Right.
The bed blocking that, as Jeff says, it's happening in the UK and elsewhere. But having said all that, I'm still.
Can I make one more comment?
Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Vince. And then I do want us to talk about. There are a couple of massive.
I'd like to come back to that too.
The first 50 minutes.
Jeff and Ian, I respect both of you guys. I've known of you and followed you both for 20 or 30 years, and think of you as the two premier, hospital/delivery system consultants, thought leaders, advisors out there. And yet today I'm really struck with a very pessimistic perspective of where the whole hospital delivery system is headed. I'm not quite sure how to reconcile all that. I can't disagree with your points about what's needed, but it just doesn't lead me to the action items that get you there. How do we just get better leadership?
Can I? Sorry, go ahead, Jeff. Then I need to agree and move on.
You have a burned out, boomer dominated clinical workforce. You have boards, overwhelmingly white male boards, 10 years older than the clinical leadership. We desperately need a generational transition in our field where power accrues to the people that are getting blood in their shoes and are up all night and are doing the really tough work. This is hard work. And I think, I think we've completely fried a whole generation of executive and clinical leadership in the last 10 years, fried them. So I am optimistic, and my optimism isn't based on some type of, crusade that's going to happen in our political system. It's based on what I experienced as a patient. I got spectacular care, and it wasn't because I was advocating for it. It's because, maybe I was lucky, but I ended up being taken care of by teams of people that thought ahead, worked together, worked with me, communicated with my family, My optimism is based on my actual use of the system. Not and where I'm pessimistic is the continued high level of magical thinking that there's some type of silver bullet out there that if we just chew on it hard enough, everything will be great. I think we've gotten addicted to policy and economic silver bullets that have turned out to be made out of, eraser. We've got to put the people that take care of us in charge of these institutions. And we've got to get rid of the 75-year-old board members that have clearly lost their compass.
That's all right. We can vote them all into the Senate. I know they're all there already.
Oh yeah. Well, there you
I mean,
go.
but I am, I'm increasingly struck by a couple things. So we do have this, technology AI thing going on in the background. We've had, maybe not importing modern technology, but more technology into the healthcare system, especially on the EMR side, over the last decade. What we haven't had is the kind of understanding, and maybe it's policy push or policy followed, that you're seeing now in other sectors of the economy, particularly energy, right? If you look at what's just happening in the vast change in the world now in renewable energy and how fast that's going, how fast the transition away from something that was, dominated by big incumbents for many, 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 many decades. I'm not saying the big incumbents are going away. I don't think Shell and ExxonMobil are going to disappear completely. But, and they're obviously supporters of the coal mining industry and whatever else in Congress. And there's now a pipeline that's going to be added to the nation because of the we probably don't need compared to the lack of electricity distribution, which we do need in the new bill just coming. But all of this is happening at a time when you are seeing radical technology change based on a combination of pricing and people kind of figuring out what's the right thing to do. And I'm with Vincent. Incentives do matter, but also professional leadership and new ways of thinking matter. And unfortunately, it's happening at a time where we're not getting the policy push. And in fact, if you look at what's happening this week, people are being dumped off Medicaid, right, in Florida and elsewhere. The public health emergency is over, and I don't see an easy, and then you get stories like the one about Alina, right, which is for I went and looked at their 990. They have $4 billion in reserves. They have at least 10 people on their 990 who earn more than $1 million a year, including and you get this kind of behavior, and no wonder people are losing faith, whether they're doctors or patients, sort of in the transition we're getting. So I'll shut up. Can somebody talk a little bit about, I know we have only a couple of minutes left. I did want to get to we never got to the debt ceiling thing. And, is there any impact on apart from that pipeline in West Virginia, is there any impact on healthcare? What do we think about that as a sort of metaphor for potential policy change of any kind in the next little bit?
I think the thing to watch for is pressure on the public purse more broadly as a result of this. Biden did a good job in his State of the Union of boxing the Republicans in about Medicare and Social Security, but Medicaid is my worry going forward. And they didn't get work requirements in Medicaid. They got it. It was more about food stamps, where conservatives are apoplectic about food stamps. But I actually thought the deal was relatively benign. Because I said to Jeff earlier this week, I couldn't even stomach looking at it because the thought that my 401k was completely dependent on Marjorie Taylor Greene was just too much for me to handle. But it looks like we've dodged a bullet, at least in the short run. But in the long run, we're in the pokey for a big number, and I think the pressure on the public purse intensifies the need for all the things we've been talking about at an operational level in healthcare.
Well, the thing that, and I thought the Republicans came within an eyelash of driving us off a steep cliff here, and they were enabled to they were given some fig leaves to come down off the cliff and take us down off the cliff with them. But this fiscal year, we're going to have $1.5 trillion federal budget deficit. The pandemic is over. The economic panic is over. And we're spending $1.5 trillion more than we're taking in. So I don't have to be a Republican or a Democrat to really worry about, oh, so we're going to borrow another $1.5 trillion from our grandkids. You get enough Democratic votes and you'll close that gap by raising taxes, by taking out the carried interest exemption, by closing loopholes and all the rest of it. You get a Republican majority and they basically savage our safety net. Oh, I'm really, I'm delighted that my 401k hasn't been cut in half, but I'm really anxious, as I think Ian is, about the fiscal trajectory that we're on. It's not sustainable. And I don't see responsible adult behavior addressing it.
You can't get that if you can't find some way of, the fact that they won't even, that they're crying, the Republicans, the majority share Greens of the world are saying, that we have keep on announcing we have 80,000 new IRS agents. And it's something like, I forget the number, there's something like only 38,000 people work at the IRS. It's somewhere,
no, it's a huge agency. There's over 100,000 people.
But the increases, this, I forget the validity of the number, but the point is, if you're going to say you can't even have the IRS collect what is actually in the books as being owed,
yeah, that's nuts.
You won't even let that happen. How you get to
nuts.
having sort of sensible tax policy and getting rid of carried interest and all that kind of stuff, to me is we're nowhere close. And look at that. Ian's about to pay his taxes. Or is that a demand for a refund? We'll find out. But
my 2 cents, if I may.
But my last comment there is that, and this leads us to the next thing that's about to happen, right? Which is that we've had on Twitter and elsewhere the announcement of who's going to be running for the Republicans, and do we have a serious what the hell happens in the next election cycle? Because this is all dependent on the grown-ups, the Democrats keeping at least the White House.
We're on the sales tax. I just saw the ad.
I quit Twitter after Elon Musk took over. So I would like to just go back and comment on the debt ceiling issue. I'm just flabbergasted. If I were a foreigner or if I were an alien, I would come down and look at this process and go, these Americans have lost their minds. And how do we get past this? I would love to see Biden invoke the 14th or try to, take the 14th Amendment theory through the courts, that we don't have this debt ceiling debate, that if we've, committed the money, it's just going to be spent. And you would think the rational thing is that both parties would agree, we need to just end this. And it just amplifies your point, Jeff, I think of, we're spending at 1.3 trillion, but tying that to the debt ceiling makes absolutely no sense.
Right. Well, I think the bigger problem is the $1.5 trillion. However crazy they may have appeared, the Republicans sort of had a point. This is not sustainable behavior. And yet they didn't have a coherent solution to it.
Yeah,
it's the threat of safety net.
The threat of driving the world economy off the edge of the planet is not, exactly a vote-winning or confidence-gaining mechanism to make the point.
Well,
there's a real grown-up shortage here, guys.
Just two observations on that, Vincent. One is, having just been with my Canadian family, I mean, they're apoplectic about their fiscal situation too. It's not like everybody around the world is running massively tiny or running surpluses at the government level. Everyone's in the pokey big time, and they're at much higher level of taxation or net. The other observation I learned from my conservative friends is, and I never really fully appreciated this, is when they cut taxes, they know it's going to increase the deficit, but that doesn't matter to them. I mean, that is the bottom line. It's like this magical math where as long as you're shrinking the available resources for government, you're doing a good thing. And that it doesn't count really from a deficit point of view. And then you have this creative fiction about trickle down economics or supply side.
It's another.
It's true to kind of as you're kind of, oh, look over there, it's going to grow and we'll grow our way out of this, which doesn't happen. And I think that's part of the problem we have in the US, is that we have one side of the political game believes that as long as we're cutting taxes, we're doing good work.
Right.
It's another
know-
case of incentives do matter. You know, if I'm a politician, you know, if I get something for my constituents today, you know, the cost is externalized, as economists
Right.
would explain it. Someone else is going to have to
Right.
deal with it.
But, you know, I don't know if you guys saw this. I mean, I'm an avid reader of The Economist 3 or 4 issues ago. Their cover story was on the extraordinary economic performance that our country has had while we're falling apart politically.
Yeah.
And, you know, 20 years ago, we were 40% of the GDP of the G7. We're now 58%. We've left Europe in the dust in terms of GDP per capita. I mean, it's not like the wealth isn't there, guys. It is. We're just not willing to use it in a responsible and thoughtful way. And that's really troubling. This leadership crisis that I'm talking about is a broad societal problem, not just a healthcare problem.
Absolutely. And I think if you look at the stock market, right, there's only 7 companies that are responsible for almost all of this year's growth, and they all have some kind of AI tinge connection in big tech, and we don't
Yeah.
have
Microsoft, Apple,
Yep.
NVIDIA, it's just 7 companies. But the GDP numbers are economy wide.
Yeah, no, I mean,
We're kicking the rest of the world's ass in economic performance, including China.
absolutely, and we also have some good demographics, and the Chinese don't. But these things are, but there are lots of underlying issues and problems to come, and they'll all have to be discussed next week because we're now on time. All right. So I want to thank my guests this week on THCB Gang. You have been listening to a strident and interesting discussion with there we go, with Ian Morrison from the wilds of Menlo Park in California, Vince Kuraitis from the calm, moderate, and liberal state of Idaho, and Jeff Goldsmith from the sunny climes of Virginia. I'm Matthew Holt. I want to say thanks for listening or watching on the video. We will see you again next week on another group. It may not be the old wise guys. There may be some younger and fewer white crumb younger people with some fewer white chromosomes around next week, according to the schedule at the moment. Looking forward to seeing you all. Thanks very much, and goodbye for now.